I had been mentioning over the last couple of days, in anticipation of this segment of our program today, one of the best television meteorologists that I've ever seen. Who I could trust. I could watch what he was telling me on television and trust it and take it to the bank. Was a fellow by the name of Dennis Ketterer. Dennis worked a meteorology career across the United States, working in some of the largest markets in the country. Interestingly enough, early in his TV career, he was based right here in Idaho. He is joining us this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley on Top Story because he has a tale. I'll put it this way: it's unrelated to weather. It's related to his odyssey through the VA hospital system, which we have been hearing a lot about over the last decade, and some of the issues that have come to the forefront, and unfortunately, I think have at least temporarily gotten pushed back to the back burner when it comes to public debate. And he's here today, I think, to tell people a cautionary tale so that perhaps in the future we will not be seeing certain things happen in these hospitals to some of our most valuable people and our most respected and best Americans. But first of all, Dennis, welcome to the program today.
Thanks, Bill. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. It's been a long time. Good talking with you, of course. The same sonorous voice that I always remember from watching on television years ago.
Well, the two people gave me the best advice I ever had in broadcasting. One, you wouldn't know. His name was Jack Sunday at KBLI in Blackfoot, Idaho. He was my program director, and I remember saying, "Hey, Jack, how do you be successful in radio? Because I really want to be successful." He goes, "Dennis, just be yourself." I said, "No, Jack, really, how do you be successful?" And he goes, "Just be yourself." "No, Jack, tell me the secret." He goes, "Dennis, just be yourself." And then oddly, Willard Scott told me the same thing, except he told me the reason that he liked my work is that I was being myself and not trying to be him. So.
Yeah, but you and Willard were about the same height, if I recall.
And waistline at one point, yes. When I had a little more hair. In D.C., I weighed 350 pounds on the air, and then got off the air and lost 100, and that's when you saw me out on Delmarva.
It was a great time too. Probably, and just not to make light of the storm they just went through, but I'm sure that when it was going on, there was probably just a moment where you thought you'd like to be there in the middle of it all.
You know what? I almost never miss. Well, I shouldn't say that because I may be when things improve for my health, I may be applying for a weather job here in Salt Lake City. But I almost never miss the newsroom environment that much anymore. But man, during that storm, and since so much of my career was in D.C. and on Delmarva, you bet I missed being here. Storms are one thing. It's like anybody can do clear to partly cloudy, but nailing the storm, that is the key. And they did a good job this time, except I think it took a while for them to realize just how strong the winds were going to spin up. And, Lewis, Delaware, which is at the mouth of the Delaware Bay, it got hit with a little over 4.5 foot storm tide, and that was devastating. The whole coastline, of course, got hit. I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff that happened in Ocean City.
Oh,
For
messy.
folks in Idaho, they don't know Ocean City's boardwalk is more like a carnival, and there's a big, many acres asphalt parking lot, and it was under about 3 feet of water.
Yeah.
And so the stores were too, yeah.
We've been hearing a lot of stories. I was mentioning in the last hour of the program that just before Walter Reed Army Medical Center closed and they moved the mission off to Belvoir and over to Bethesda, that I went there. In fact, a group from Delmarva went over there and did a barbecue for some of the men and women, and they were being closed because they had serious issues with the care that they were providing for people. You went through the system as well. We need to point that out that
Yes.
your odyssey is a tale of what should not happen. Maybe you could start by telling us where it started, what happened, and what the outcome has been.
It started at the VA hospital in Phoenix, and I'm sure that your listeners have seen and heard news reports about how bad the care there can be. And it's a worse nightmare than anything that's been reported on the news, in part because most veterans there feel like, hey, once you get seen, at least you're getting decent care. Well, um, it's just not true. You don't always get decent care. Due to a cavalcade of errors, I ended up losing it's called a BKA, below the knee amputation on my left leg, because an infection was not treated correctly, and in fact, the doctors most likely gave me the infection by touching me with their bare hands. Uh, Ironically, I was in a clinic for research. The wound that I started on, they healed up, but then they gave me a wound, putting me in something called a cam boot, which I told my head of podiatry there, don't put me in a cam boot. It always makes my foot worse. No, you have to have it on. So I put it on, and I got a little blister. And that little blister turned into something more. Um, the doctors, the two attendings, he was out of town for, he didn't see me for 3 weeks. His other attending saw me. She touched me with her bare hands. He had touched me with his bare hands. And coincidentally, I had 2 life-threatening bacterial infections. So the odds that I got a hospital-acquired infection were high. Um, I had already filed a claim against the VA for other poor care, and so when this came around, my lawyer pulled the claim to amend it, and you don't want to be in the business of being litigious by any means, but due to their inabilities there, if nothing else, inability. They took away 25% of my work year before last, and last year it was about half of it. And you try to survive on that. If you couldn't go to your job half the time, unfortunately, I was in real estate, so I was self-employed and I couldn't get fired. But imagine your employer if you had to miss half the year. You think you'd have a job?
No.
Now, I will say this: the surgeon who worked on me, the chief of podiatry, is world-renowned as a surgeon, and he should be. But the aftercare is where the problem was. My stay in the hospital for that infection. This is a hospital, and some of your people listening either work in a hospital or have worked in a hospital or retired from working in a hospital. Can you imagine being in a private room because you do have a communicable infection and they need to isolate you? Your room's supposed to be cleaned every day. My room got cleaned 4 times in 2 weeks. Only twice did the room get cleaned almost entirely. It's supposed to be sprayed, and when I say for bugs, I'm not talking about insects. I mean bacterial infections and that sort of thing, bugs. It's supposed to be sprayed in its entirety. They sprayed the room the room was kind of an L shape, and they sprayed the room from where they could just barely get in. They never really hit the whole floor. That's just an example of what went on. My wife was confronted by a male nurse there who, sometimes at the VA they forget that it's a civilian hospital now. You're not in the military anymore. And he just started yelling and screaming at my wife right from jump, not like saying, hey, we need to do this or that. She didn't really do anything wrong. He just went off on her because another nurse didn't like her being there giving me care, because in the VA hospital, if you don't have somebody there advocating for you at the times that you can't advocate for yourself, you may end up in real trouble. Can you imagine being in a hospital bed asking a nurse for water and it takes 6 hours to come? And you ask for it 3 or 4 times?
I am just stunned that because we've been hearing these stories for so long, why is it that we don't have anyone taking more serious action?
Well, you know what? Veterans are a political football. And you know how you can tell if I don't care what party they are today, the only way to know if a politician is lying is to see if their lips are moving or their pen is writing. And I mean, Obama came out, we are going to take care of our veterans, da 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 da. And he has a way of sounding so heartfelt and sincere, and of course, nothing. Now, I will say that he did send out to, credit where credit is due. He did send out to the VA hospital a bunch of people from the White House to investigate. And there are people who are having their backsides crawled up with a microscope back there. But it was such a bad deal. One of the three best VA hospitals in the country is Salt Lake City, and I can tell you the difference between the two hospitals is night and day. Um, but to answer your question directly, to avoid being a politician and going off in another area, the reason is that we as a voting bloc don't do our job as veterans. And the problem is a lot of veterans don't even use the VA system because they have health care from another angle that they can get it. And so we don't stand together as a voting bloc. We don't hold feet to the fire. McCain talks a good game, but in reality, he does nothing. And talk about a vet. I mean, obviously, for some reason, if benefits are going to get cut, they cut it to vets and seniors first. If I think what it is that politicians aren't afraid of losing our votes. It really comes down to that.
And that's a good point to be made because, you do see some people out there who vote in very strong blocks and they get catered to for that reason. But since veterans traditionally are coming from all different walks of life, I think after they leave the service, they just go back to those walks of life and you don't get that sort of cohesion any longer.
I had considered finding out where the bulk of vets lived in the Valley of the Sun, as it's called, the Phoenix area, moving into that district and running for office and working the vets to get their support and their help so that I could do something in Congress to help change that, because presidents since Abraham Lincoln have talked about taking care of veterans. And here we are. It's a little better. Obama did get some little things done, but to be fair, in Phoenix, it ought to just be closed down and started over again. Not quite unlike what they did, as you were mentioning, at Walter Reed. Walter Reed had some horror stories coming out of it. On the other hand, my son-in-law, a retired lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps, got blown up in Fallujah by an IED. And he was at Walter Reed, as I recall, and they helped him tremendously. But by then, it was a little too late, and so it comes down to the money that they have available for vets, the facilities they have. Can you imagine? I don't remember the population of Twin Falls, but I'm thinking it's around 40,000. Would that be correct?
Up to about 50 now, yeah.
50. How many hospitals do you have?
Just one.
Okay, just one. But the average age in Twin Falls is probably something below 65, right?
Yeah.
The
Dennis,
median
hold on to that thought for a moment. We've got a short break. You can stick around for a few more minutes, right?
Sure.
Dennis Ketterer joining us this morning, longtime television meteorologist, sharing a bit of the story of his odyssey through the VA medical system. And it's not always a pretty picture. He's going to have some more thoughts on that with us in just a couple of minutes. We'll pick up the conversation on the other side of the break. It's 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Our guest this half hour of the program, Dennis Ketterer, longtime television meteorologist, and sharing with us this morning his story, which is a story about the VA medical system that just shouldn't happen. And to go into a hospital and then come out with a loss of a large portion of a leg when that was completely unexpected brings up some questions about where we're going in this country and how we treat those veterans who are going through the system. And there has been a long time saying that you can judge a country by the way that it treats its veterans. Although we were having a conversation off air, and he mentioned Tom Shannon, one of his all-time radio favorites, and that was one of mine too. I also grew up on that same voice. Tommy worked not only in Detroit, but he worked in Buffalo as well, so I got to hear him there considerably when I was a kid. We're about the same age, Dennis. We're still young, but we knew all of the old greats from way back.
Oh, Tom Shannon was such a great talent. He's the reason I got out of music radio, because when I listened to him on vacation, when I went back home to Detroit from Blackfoot, Idaho, I realized I didn't have that kind of talent. So I got in TV because, honestly, you need less talent to be in TV than radio. Then both, and you need that.
Well, I was working in TV, and I was going to be an 11 o'clock anchor, and they replaced me with some young fellow by the name of David Muir, and that's when I realized my TV career was over. I couldn't compete with that.
Yeah, and whatever happened to him?
Yeah. Hey, we were talking in the previous segment, and you were trying to draw an analogy about the size of the hospital in Twin Falls and the size of the population, and we had to go to the break. But you're trying to make a point there, right?
Right. The VA hospital, and I don't know the exact. This is, by the way, this part of the median age is supposition, and it's from my experience and observations there. I just turned 60, and I'm on the low end of the bell curve there. There are people lower, but I'd say the median age that they work on, being Phoenix, is 65. Most of the vets are older. But that one hospital with 104 beds, that if they have to, they can expand it to 140 through overcrowding, handles 82,000 veterans. 82,000. Now, these docs touched me with their bare hands. They shouldn't have. That's a lack of standard of care. Make no mistake about it. I had an open wound. There's a reason they're supposed to wear gloves when they touch you. But at the same time, Bill, they're so busy that it's easy to be forgetful. When I was in the podiatry department, they had 10 stalls there. They're not closed rooms, they're just curtains, like in a hospital room where you have curtains separating you. That's pretty much all it was. And at the same time, they had residents and students working on veterans' feet there. And then the head of podiatry, the chief attending, had to go around and see pretty much everybody on his own. And those 10 stalls were busy from 9 in the morning until 4, well, by about 3:30. There was only 2 or 3, but through at least 2:30 in the afternoon. Well, that's 60 or 70 people that he's got to see every day. And the other attendings were near worthless. They stood around and talked a lot, but they almost never showed up and did anything. I rarely saw another attending in any of the other rooms or even heard them, other than talking in the hall about the ball game or the recipe of the day. So there's some mismanagement there, to be sure. But the problem is that you've got these people overworked. Now, Phoenix has about 4 million people, give or take. More give than take. There's a little over 4 million. And 82,000 veterans. And when I started going there, it was 78,000. In 3 years, it went to 82, and it's going to be more and more because that area is growing. Well, how can they possibly give a decent quality standard of care when they're so overbooked? But what Congress did is they failed to say, you know what, maybe we've got a bunch of veterans in the northwest portion, let's build another hospital facility there. Maybe in the southwest portion is the other area where the bulk of our veterans are. Maybe we should build another hospital there to take some of the pressure off. They didn't do that. They built a new clinic in the southeast, but they already had that clinic. They just put it in a different facility. So a lot of it is Congress just not funding. Do I think these doctors would have touched me barehanded otherwise? Absolutely not. But when you go from patient to patient, you've got to look at that wound and touch that wound. Can you imagine putting on 50, 60 pairs of gloves a day doing that?
Yeah. Dennis?
And they have to. They have to change gloves every time because they don't want to spread the disease.
Got to say goodbye today, but hopefully we'll be talking again soon, and we'll stay in touch. And if you got any updates, please share those with me too, as well.
I know you have to run. I'm just going to say this right quickly. Your vets in Twin Falls are lucky to have Salt Lake VA. It is the difference between night and day, professional and amateur. They even told me when I got to Salt Lake, if I had had my problem there, I wouldn't have lost my foot. By the time I got to it, I was even sent out on the wrong antibiotic, spread in my bones, and I had to lose my leg to save my life. So be glad in Twin Falls that you have the Salt Lake VA.
Hey, thank you so much, and God bless you. I hope that you're on the mend, and we get to talk again sometime soon.
I would like that, Bill.
Take care. Dennis Ketterer joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. As he mentioned, he got his broadcast career, his start in Idaho, moved on, ended up working in Washington, D.C., in some of the largest markets in America. We've got more coming up in just a few minutes.